Hello and welcome to Choirboys TV. My name is Iain McNay, and today we're going to talk about the history of Survival Records. And we have with us the two founders and owners of Survival, David Rome and Anne-Marie Heighway. Hello guys.
Hi.
So it kind of all started with a band you had together called Drinking Electricity way back in 1979, was it?
That's right. Well, I could start with that one maybe. I passed my law finals in 1979, so I qualified
You're a lawyer.
as a lawyer. Originally,
that.
yeah. And so I promised myself that because I'd passed my finals, I'd buy this thing called a Moog synthesizer that was going to change the nature of music. And so that's what I did. I went into Rod Argent's Keyboards in London and bought the synthesizer, brought it home, and I played a bit of guitar as a kind of kid really, and just sort of strummed around on acoustics, and then started to mess around with this synthesizer and. Ended up with a friend bouncing a 2-track tape on a sort of stereo tape machine of a version of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, Shaking All Over, which was the first pop song I ever saw on TV when I was like kind of 5 or something, And so anyway, I made this extraordinary kind of Flying Lizards-esque sort of noise version of Shaking All Over on my 2-track, and then came to look for a vocalist to sing on it, because I certainly wasn't going to sing. I wanted a female vocalist, and I knew a number of female vocalists because I played in a few little local bands and things. But all of them looked at me in complete horror when they heard this track, which sounded like kind of nothing they'd ever heard before. So I then knew Anne-Marie, a friend of a friend, so I played the track to her, and she actually took it seriously and said, yeah, I can try something on that. And so she was the only person, everyone else thought I was crazy, she was the only person who actually took it seriously. And so we then went up and bounced your vocal onto our 2-track tape, and then made a cassette and sort of sent out the cassette to all and sundry. And had a reply from Bob Last, who was the founder of Fast Products, one of the original...
Based in Edinburgh, weren't they?
That's right, Edinburgh band. That's right.
That's very leading edge label, actually.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And he just signed the the Human League and the Gang of Four and the Dead Kennedys. Yes. I know were involved with Cherry, and so we sent him the tape, and he rang up and said basically, yes, I'd like to release it. And so
we had a good start. So you just sent one tape out?
No, we sent out a few actually. Yeah, we probably
Yes.
sent out sort of 10 or 12.
I think we probably had about 4 replies as well.
We did actually, yeah. People would ring up. I remember Duke Visso rang up.
That's
and
right.
He was the one guy and said, it's so weird. It's either kind of terrible or great, and I can't decide which it is, But Bob was great. He was really up for it. We never actually met him until the day we went to the studio. So we signed a contract, and then we drove up to Spacewood Studios in Cambridge, and we met, and in fact he was late, so I had to arrive in the studio first of all and start recording the B-side, having never been in the studio or really done anything like this in my life before. So I just started sort of pounding out this B-side with nobody knowing what was happening really, and then Bob turned up a couple of hours later and we did the vocal on the track in a couple of days, and that was it, and that was Shaking All Over. And that was one of his first releases on his new label, Pop Oral. And
right, so Pop Oral was a kind of a real art type label.
Yeah, that was the idea.
How he presented everything.
And it was his chance to be a producer as well, I think. I think he produced the tracks and designed the artwork. And the artwork was great. He had a really good visual sense.
And the little badge.
That's right.
So Anne-Marie, just going back to you, how did you feel when David first played you the demo of the track?
I think because I've been in touch with so many forms of music, and at that time I was listening to the African Sanctus, which again was quite out there, that I just thought, hey, why not? And I did love the Flying Lizards too. So
Had you sung before very much?
I sang in choirs. I'd not been a soloist before, so it was a bit scary, but I thought, why not?
You just went for it. Good.
I just went for it.
Yeah. And so the single came out.
Single came out and got some radio play, which was very exciting. And he put a radio plugger on it, and we made the indie charts and got reviewed in the music press. And it was great. It was great because all my friends who'd sort of formed bands and played earnestly for sort of years and years of sort of angsting about the music, sort of were horrified to see that I'd had a record out and sort of released and reviewed and getting in the indie charts. So it was great. And because I was still just finishing my training as a lawyer at that stage, so that was kind of so I was doing a complete double life, working in a solicitor's office during the day and then kind of making music and doing stuff at night basically.
Right. Yeah.
But as soon as I could leave, as soon as because I was doing like an article clerk, so I had a sort of a date when I'd finally qualified. and then I quit. In fact, it's just a little interesting aside. I got my practicing certificate from Lord Denning, who was a huge kind of legal hero of the time and a sort of appeal court and lord of House of Lords appeals and stuff. And I remember going up on stage at the Law Society because I wanted to take, it'd taken me 5 years to qualify, and I really wanted to milk it. So he came up and got my certificate from Lord Denning and shook my hand, and he said, "What are you going to do, young man?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to quit and form a record company." And he went, yes, good. And as I got to the edge of the stage, I saw him look round like looking at horror at me.
Has it registered?
So that was the end of that, basically. But it actually, surprisingly, legal training was quite useful in a way, because it did help with all the contracts and sort of, sorting out stuff. But so that was it. And then we made 2 more singles with Pop Oral, by which time I think the idea of the label...
And Bob Last produced all of those
Produced
himself,
those, that's right, yes. And
was he a
designed
good
them.
producer?
I guess I didn't really know at that stage. I'd never been in a recording studio before, so it was my first time ever in a recording studio. I'd come from a 2-track to a kind of 16-track, so I had no idea. But I think so.
I think we were also out there at the time. We were really up for anything, so we'd try a number of things, and then there'd be a consensus between you and Bob on the whole.
So this was around the time that he put out Being Boiled by the Human League,
It was a little bit after that, I think, because the Fast Products was kind of phase 1, which I think was the Human League.
That was on Fast rather than Pop Oral?
Yes, it was. Okay. Pop Oral was us, Boots for Dancing, the Fire Engines, the Flowers, band called Restricted Code. Interestingly, who are now re-emerging with the kind of, like the Fire Engines album was released by Domino,
That's right,
Franz Ferdinand, homage kind of thing, and that's sort of, bizarrely, those bands are now becoming, recent, as is our stuff. There is actually a sort of, a recurrence, a resurgence of interest in early 80s sort of primitive pop music, for want of a better word. So, that's something that's actually come around again. But we can talk about that a bit later on, because there's other stories that tail into that.
Yeah, so keeping it in a sequential order. Yeah. So you had the 3 singles on Pop Oral.
Yeah.
Yes. And the sales increased single by single?
Kind of. I think that Shaky All Over, the first single, was probably the most successful, I would say.
Okay.
And then Bob was he was quite art. It was very art-oriented. So he wanted this to he then said to me, "I want you to make an album of instrumental music."
Film music type.
Kind of thing, and also influenced by kind of the sort of German kind of Noir kind of, that sort of robotic kind of guitar synthesizer music. And we started doing that, but I think, to be honest, that he'd sort of, he had a lot of fingers. He was managing the Human League, he was running Fast Products as part of the distribution arm for the cartel in Scotland, and I think that his attention just got very stretched. And so eventually we ended up parting company. And we thought, great, we'll form our own. This looks pretty easy. We'll form our own record company.
It's a very brave move.
Yeah, that's right.
2 musicians and 1 musician-stroke lawyer forming a label. So.
Yes. Well, my father was an entrepreneur, and as a younger woman, I'd worked with him in his company. So I'd got a kind of training in running companies, and I'd always said to David, actually, the real profits to be made, if there are profits to be made, will be made by the company, not by the artist. And so David said, "Okay, I'll find the artist, you make it work."
Okay.
Which is really how we kind of...
You were the accountant. I mean, you were trained in accountancy and a kind of company secretary.
Yes,
so you
and
had
it's
that
how
background.
we agreed to make the next steps forward. So rather than looking for somebody else to take us on, we would do it ourselves.
And you didn't have to look very far for your first release, did you?
That's right. And we knew that we could sell, maybe, a couple of thousand records, so you had to start. Having said that, we were still working. We were both working in a wine bar at that stage to keep alive. And that was kind of, it wasn't until about 18 months after we started the label that we gave up working. I was the world's worst waiter, as you can imagine, probably. But,
So you put out your single, Sublimor.
Yes, Subliminal.
Random parts, random particles. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that must have encouraged you, must have sold enough for you to...
I think so. I remember going down to Pinnacle, and of course we thought, well, we'll spend...
So Pinnacle was your distributor?
Yes, that's right. We went to Pinnacle first of all, and that was great, and then we kind of...
We thought, that's it?
Yeah, we designed the sleeve, hours painstakingly designing the sleeve, made the record, and then, got the sleeve, finally got down to Pinnacle, and thought, well, we can relax now, that's it, job done, basically.
You're waiting for them to do everything
Exactly,
else.
That's right.
It isn't quite as simple as that.
It isn't.
You kind of realise, hang on a minute, there's a lot to do, so we then had to kind of reallocate tasks. So it was my job then to plug the music press.
And mine to go into the radio.
The Radio 1. So we thought we would take it on ourselves. And I remember probably for 5 or 6 years, every Wednesday I'd be going around, Sounds, Melody Maker, NME, Record Mirror was the kind of circuit. And the idea was always you had to dodge past reception by blagging your way through an appointment, so you could actually pester journalists directly to review your records. And I'm thinking back on it, it was really hard, sort of unsatisfying. Because the journalists could be journalists in those days were kings of everything. They could be hugely disdainful and kind of, down on you. So every week I'd go around and try and sort of persuade them to plug things, and they'd sort of abuse you and throw things at you, but you'd go back next week and finally they'd review it or they'd do something. So it was a hard training. Looking back on it, I wouldn't want to go back through that again, I don't think,
But reviews then was so important because
Absolutely,
there wasn't so many avenues for radio, was
That's
there?
right. Well, it was really kind of, it was Kid Jensen and John Peel, really, wasn't it? That was the pre-Jonas Long going back.
And on the radio front, I remember ringing up a producer, it was actually Chris Lycett, rang him up and I said, I've been told that in order to get my record played, I've got to hire a plugger. Yeah. And he said, no, not at all. What you've got to do is just let us have a copy. And I said, what's the best way of doing that? Obviously, he would say post, but he didn't. He said, come down, bring some copies, and we'll take it from there. So I went down, and
Radio 1.
This is Radio 1. And he took me round all the producers and said, hi, this is Anne-Marie, Drinking Electricity, this is our latest single. He was fabulous. Yeah. And once I'd done it once, I was very, very cheeky. And I would phone in and say, please can I come in and have a chat? And usually one or other of them would say, yeah, come on down. Yeah. And once in, I'd just pop my head round and say, don't forget, I need a play on my record. And so I tried not to pester too hard, but just keep my face so that they knew and that the record was at the top of the pile.
Yeah, absolutely. So you signed some other artists?
Yep, then we began to get sent, because I think there was like a sort of emerging, because we were really pretty much sort of electronic, for want of a better word, electronic pop kind of model, quite like the kind of early mute releases. So we began to get a bit of a reputation for that, and we signed, other artists started to approach us. Richard Bone from America, who was like an American sort of art theatre guy, who made some really good records for us, and in fact people still ask us about them. And basically made 4 or 5 other records, signed some other artists, and then we finally signed the famous robotic duo Tik and Tok.
Yes, absolutely.
Had a record with Summer City, and they moved in a different world as well. I remember thinking that we'd actually arrived when I got a copy of Record Mirror, and there was the back cover was a full-page colour photo of them looking exotic with sort of makeup and
they were just so amazing.
Things coming out of their heads, and and they were well plugged into the sort of Duran Duran party circuit and those kind of things. So we released their record Somewhere in the City, and that was our first 12-inch as well.
And again, we were really lucky
really started to sell
with that because they'd been taking it round all the majors. It was a fabulous track, taking it round the majors, but it was right at the end of the summer. And there was no way the majors could slot it into their schedules. Yeah. And they said, how soon? I said, we could do it. And they said, how soon could you get it released? And I said, next week. And they said, okay.
You got a record release in a week? That's impressive.
Like 2 weeks.
We did. We did. We got the sleeve.
They had the sleeve ready, didn't they?
They had the sleeve ready, which was a big one. No, we did. We got it turned around and said, this is really important. Only a minimum run, I think, at that stage, but enough to get into radio and the press.
And did it sell well?
Yeah, that's when we gave up our wine bar job.
Yes, it did. It sold phenomenally. Interestingly, the exporters, the whole dance 12-inch thing had just come into being, and we'd done really well with Richard Bone's track called Joy of Radiation on 12-inch, and we did the Tik and Tok one on 12-inch. Exporters, I remember we'd drive around London with boxes of 12-inch singles to deliver to the exporters so that they could get them shipped that day, because they'd order that day and they would want them by the end of the day. It was that fast. But we went to the Pinnacle conference and the sales reps were saying, your remix is just so fantastic, this is going to make all the difference. Whereas in fact, all we had done was actually extended it. I don't think you changed it, had you?
No, we just
there was a longer drum section.
Edited in drum tracks, basically,
Yes, and they thought it was a completely new, unheard mix.
The economy of remixing.
They looked at it with different eyes.
Yeah.
And it was great.
And
Yes.
so what was the kind of the turning point in terms of something that really started to take off for you?
Well, that was probably the first record that really sold a lot.
That was our first
Yeah, it
top.
was always a financial struggle.
Yeah.
Though.
So it sold like 10,000 or 20,000?
Probably 10,000, I should
No, it was
think.
more
I
than
think
that.
something
It was
more
between
than
10
that.
and
It's difficult
20.
to remember in those
Okay,
days,
Yeah.
yeah.
But in those days, which was a lot, yes.
Yeah, it was a
Small,
lot.
typical business. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was also their best-selling record quite often. You get, and then we made an album with them, which we sold like probably 7,000 or 8,000 copies of the album, and
in those days, you could actually make a business if you sold 7,000 or 8,000
Yes.
albums. That was
Oh,
quite
yeah.
as long as you
respectable.
did everything
was,
yourselves,
absolutely.
basically. So we were driving around, weeks driving around London, delivering records, and going
Yeah.
to sort of depots in the sort of Wapping to pick up sort of 2,000 pressings that had just arrived from France at 3 in, and driving them back, and then getting up at 6 and driving them out again.
Yes.
It was very labour-intensive.
It
But,
was.
it was good, but we never really had anything that really sort of established us in the way that you had someone like the Dead Kennedys, that suddenly you were selling 30, 40, 50,000 albums, I guess. We never had that kind of act that really broke it through. So we were mainly focused on singles anyway, probably, I think. And
We were in the early days, yes, we were.
And really by kind of 84, I remember, we'd probably released, 10, 15 records, and it was make or break for us. We went to Midem for the first time in 84.
So Medium, we should explain, is a
Music
conference
business.
so once a year in January in Cannes, where the music business descends and talk to each other. And
it's deal-making time, basically.
Yeah.
And we knew that we had to go to Midem and come back with a certain amount of money, otherwise we were really up against it. And so we had to do deals in France, Germany, and
so you would
Spain.
license the rights to your records. and
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yes,
because
yes.
until then, we'd been supplying to the exporters, and the exporters were actually taking a large quantity of our releases on 12-inch.
Yeah.
So we knew there had to be a market out there, so what we wanted to do was...
Sell them direct.
Get the
Absolutely.
advances.
Yeah,
Yes.
get the advance, yeah.
Which we managed to do, luckily. We managed to do. And we also did a sub-publishing deal with Christmas Music that was very helpful for us, because that was a good place to be, basically. And we had to deliver some ridiculous amount of records in order to get out of the deal. But those days you didn't care, you just wanted the check. So, you could
And
get the
also,
overdraft for a few weeks.
they also supplied us with demo time
Yeah,
for our
yeah.
published
Yes, so they were
artists.
supportive in
and
that
again,
way.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
And again, that was an absolute godsend.
So I know you had furniture, didn't you? That was
Yes. And
sold a lot of copies.
Well,
yes,
we really signed them in '83, probably, I think, actually. And we released a mini album when the boom was on, and a number of singles. And it was we were getting to that stage where we were feeling that we had Record of the Week and Melody Maker and things. The kind of profile we were getting and the sales we were achieving was always a struggle
so
to
disparate.
match it up. We
Yes.
really didn't have much money for marketing, so though we had radio play and press, it was harder to get really kind of quality level of sales in order to really take things further. So we made a decision to move into management. So Anne-Marie took over managing furniture.
So you kept the label going.
Kept the label going,
And you put out the
but
first
certain
furniture
bands
records,
we thought
yeah.
they need
We need
video
more
budgets.
marketing money,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you then basically took furniture to Stiff, which is a whole saga in itself that you can talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely. The
So
legendary Dave.
Stiff were independent in one way, but mainly worked with major companies, didn't they, in terms of their
Yes,
distribution?
this was the kind of final incarnation. Dave Robinson had left Ireland. He was a managing director of Ireland for a couple of years, and he'd
Yes.
left Ireland and gone back to being independent again. And basically had, still had the Pogues and Madness. And
So
people
still
like
Jake
that.
Riviera was there?
No.
he'd gone by then.
Paul Conroy was there?
Yes.
Was he there? Maybe
Yes,
he was
he was.
actually.
Yes,
Yeah,
he was.
Okay.
yeah, I think he was. Yes, and it was a great experience. I wouldn't have been without it. But
No.
but it was. Well, you told the story. I mean, we made the album, and Brilliant Mind was the single.
Yes, and do you know, that guy was so passionate about his releases. I remember sitting one evening and A Brilliant Mind was being played on the television. We'd made a video and they were playing it, and it was one of those programmes where you vote for the best video of the week and then you got more plays for your video. And there was a band, he'd got a band come in that he was looking to sign, and he said, I'm not going to talk to you till each of you has registered your vote at least 10 times. In this video.
Manning the phones, yeah.
And he would keep his staff late to try and do these things. He was just so passionate about making it work. Because again, I suppose he was at the other end. We didn't know how little money he actually had. But, that guy really made a pound count
Stretch.
at least
Yeah.
£5 worth,
Yeah.
every pound. And his belief was phenomenal. But, sadly, it didn't work. Brilliant Mind kept climbing in the charts, went into the top 20. We got played on Top of the Pops. And then the Liquidators were called in at Stiff.
So you never got the money in the end?
Never got any money, no.
Never
And
got
also
any
really
money.
kind of
And-
lost the momentum as well, more
Yeah.
than that.
Yes,
really, for
because the band didn't want to leave their newly recorded album behind. And I didn't have the experience at that stage to know that actually, because all the majors wanted to sign them, the band said, no, not. We want to stay there because our music is there.
Yes.
And of course, had I had a little more experience, I'd have realised that actually the major, if we'd signed to a major, they'd have managed to do a deal with the receiver or the liquidator or whatever and buy the masters.
Yeah. So the opportunity went, really.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. What they did was just really let out the first pressing, the initial pressing, which was 30,000 sales of The Wrong People. It just went.
Yeah.
Just went, and that was it. But we fought and fought to get free of our contract because it was possible to be assigned to whomsoever, and we did. And then I took them to BMG, and then we started the process again. And they certainly had a good couple of years in which to get enough angst together to write another cracking album.
Right. So meantime, you kept the Survival label going.
Yeah.
Yes.
You had
Yeah,
Eddie
'cause-
and Sunshine.
Yes.
That's right, Eddie and Sunshine. That's right. They were that was our one NME front cover, which I sort of
Right,
found a copy of in
okay.
the garage the other day,
Yeah.
and they were great actually. We signed them quite early on. I remember they had a single out on a label called Human, and then they just looked like really interesting people. There was like Electronic Cabaret was their sort of tag really, and we made an album with them, and then we had an idea of promoting this thing called Living TV, which was like a sort of way ahead of its time. You think about it. It was like a chat show. They filmed a chat. They had a chat show live on stage where they'd have guests. People would arrive and do songs, and then the second half would be they would do a set of their own. And it became the kind of hot ticket. So we booked Raymond's Review Bar. That was the one place.
Soho.
Absolutely, Soho.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We booked one of their theatres one night a week for like a 5 or 6 week run, I think.
Yes.
And so we were Amory was on the box office, sort of sitting behind the Raymond's Review Bar, having to refer people to the right place, you know.
And even having to kind of give money back if people had come, because these people would come back and
Japanese
say,
businessmen would arrive.
"It's not what I thought it was going to be," and I'd go, "Came to the wrong theatre. It's over there."
That was great, and I remember everyone. I remember sort of Trevor Horn arriving and Paul Morley arriving and wanting 3+1s that I couldn't give him, so he went away in a huff. So it was a great time to be. You felt like you were at the centre of things.
Yes.
Still a
Yes.
struggle. Still a struggle to sell
Yeah.
records, but it was exciting, and it was. I remember actually having a drink with Paul Raymond, and he's been in the news. Sadly, he died recently, didn't he? But going up to his penthouse and having a drink with him afterwards, and him being really interested in what we were doing and how it worked and everything else. It was kind of exciting to
And
have done.
he actually did enjoy helping us to make this work, because we'd looked at a lot of venues before we
And
started.
This was perfect place to do it.
It
Really.
absolutely
And it held,
was.
like 100 people or something?
No, probably
quite
nearer.
small.
It was
quite
probably
small,
a
though.
couple of hundred, I
can't
think.
remember. But
Because we thought,
it was
gosh,
hard to make money out of it, as always. Great creatively, but not so good for money.
but it was a couple of hundred, and
Yeah.
certainly, as David said, the word of mouth. We had queues towards the second half of the season.
Well, it was kind of London media event, really,
It
wasn't
was,
it? It was the
absolutely.
hot ticket in town for a while.
People would
which
say,
is really
if you
nice.
want to go somewhere on a Monday night, go down Raven's
Place to be,
Review.
yeah.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you were still putting out singles with Tik and Tok.
Yes,
So
yes, and
presumably
they
they
Yes.
did
were
an album
okay.
with them. That's right, and they went
Yeah.
with Gary Newman as well. So they were sort of part. We had them opening as an opening act on one of Gary Newman's tours, which was great. And then Gary Newman appeared on the album, so that was good. So we were kind of motoring along. But it was again for me, it was always the struggle to really take the record to where I thought it could go. You'd release a record and it would sell a couple of thousand, and people would say that's great, and then it would go away again. So in terms of kind of building careers, for me, it
Yes.
was always, you know, if I could have more time in the studio and more money on marketing. So I was always kind of chasing that. So that kind of led to us doing a deal with EMI, bassey.
That's right.
On the back of furniture.
On the back of furniture, because in fact, EMI had taken the other band that we'd chosen to manage, which was View from the Hill, whom David was managing, and David Munns at EMI had said no, he wasn't interested in furniture. And I remember went to one of their parties and he came up to me and he said, "I'm having no more furnitures. You are signing this band to the label." No, sorry, signing this label to EMI. And so we did.
Yeah,
we did a deal with them.
So 86, basically, we did a sort of talent scouting, a sort of feeder act for EMI. We would find and develop bands. We had access to their money. We'd stay independent, but then we could transfer. Bands would graduate from us into EMI system.
So it was quite a good system.
Once they'd proven themselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, but I remember the great story of David Munns again, who, with Nick Gatfield, used to now kind of president of A&R at EMI, comes full circle. I remember Nick telling me that they'd driven to our offices in Ealing, which was like a house that we'd sort of knocked down walls. It was very ramshackle, and he was saying, you know, I hope these people are really poor, so we don't have to give them too much money.
And they'll be grateful.
He was visibly shocked at how poor we were. I remember we had carpet. We'd been bought some carpet from the Earls Court Motor Show that had been used to cover the stands of the motor shows, which was like kind of 10p a square metre of really cheap carpet, which looked great for about 2 months, and then slowly began to deteriorate until it
Which
was
also
kind of
had tire
completely
marks.
threadbare. Had a few tire marks around it as well. So it was a real hand-to-mouth operation, but it was great. So suddenly, yes, then we could finance. So we put our own 16-track studio in there, which was great, and we suddenly had the ability to at least
We had time, didn't we?
yeah, you could develop bands that you know you knew that they would take 2 or 3 singles to build up to a certain level, and then if it worked, you could start to cross them over into the EMI system. And of course, the most successful of those was a band called the Quireboys, you know, who was sort of 80s rock act.
Yeah. That's quite a departure from you.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. My
Tik and
A&R
Tok
policy,
and
yes.
drinking electricity to
It is. 'Cause
Choirboys.
it's interesting. My A&R policy ended up being that I would sort of what everyone else was thinking was really not happening was the best area to go into. So by the mid '80s, English rock music was not having much of a, you know, they'd had the kind of new wave of British heavy metal and that had died down. There was very little happening with English rock music, and I just remember going to see them supporting Johnny Thunders at the Town and Country Club. And there were 1,000 people there to see them, and you kind of thought, hang on a minute, this is extraordinary. There's 1,000 people to see this band, and they had sort of residences at the Marquee as well. And I realised that there was a real ground level support for a band, and they were making money out of touring. They were living from touring, which has always been a big plus for me. So we signed that. I remember them.
And they were hungry.
Yeah, they really wanted. Yeah,
they really wanted success.
It makes a difference.
It makes such a difference, doesn't it?
That drive and commitment.
Yes.
They were 100% for it.
Yes.
And then things we released a couple of singles from them, and then things went into complete warp drive because they'd opened for Guns N' Roses when Guns N' Roses came to England. So Guns N' Roses went back, and they were at one stage they were sort of England's answer to Guns N' Roses, really, in a sort of very general sense. So Guns N' Roses went back to America and started talking about this English band. So I started getting phone calls from extraordinary, presidents of American record companies and stuff.
So which is the
I want this
apocryphal
band,
story?
That's right. That's a great story. A guy called Irving Azoff, who was now manages the Eagles actually. But he was running MCA Records in those days and had a very hard man reputation. Ringing me up and saying, "Listen, kid, I want this band." And I said, "Well, I'd love it, but I'm under contract with EMI, and if EMI want them, then he said, don't give me any of that." He said, "I can take you out of this business." I thought, well, here I am sitting in a sort of ramshackle house in Ealing. I don't think you really realise how poor I am. You can take me out of the business. I've barely got 1 foot in it. And so that was my Irving Azoff story. But and eventually EMI slowly woke up to them. Literally we had American record companies flying in to meet them.
Yes, they'd fly over on Concorde to see a gig.
Presidents of ATCO and Bob Fife
and then EMI thought,
people. Maybe we should pick them up. So EMI finally picked them up. But at which stage they were then looking for a manager. Because as far as possible, I've always encouraged bands to try and save the manager decision for as late in their career as they can, because I think obviously there's nothing worse than a band that has a manager that doesn't really cut it, and if they're going to make the step up, it's can be a real disadvantage. So they were without a manager at that point, and Sharon Osbourne, the one and only, then became their manager.
Right.
And so we had a brief period of a few months working hand in hand with Sharon, which was quite an experience, wasn't it?
And a fantastic party.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Was she a good manager?
I think so, yeah. I mean, she was very ruthless, but I think that was her reputation, really.
Yes,
Yeah. And she was prepared to
her
work with
training
us.
from her dad as well.
That's right,
Yes.
that's right, that's right.
Yes.
And she came in, I remember she arrived in a chauffeur-driven car, again at our tumble-down studio, and sort of arrived in a chauffeur-driven car and came in and it was very, very civil, but there was no question that she was taking control, basically.
That was it. Goodbye.
And we were kind of sort of slowly frozen out, but which was the nature of the deal anyway. Really, was that they were going to go on, and then she renegotiated the contract with the MI and got a huge advance from them. And the first album, it's a classic rock story. The first album sold 1 million copies. We've got gold records. I remember the album went in at number 2. Phil Collins was at number 1, and the Quireboys debut went in at number 2. And I remember seeing them. It was great seeing them. I remember seeing them at the Monsters of Rock at Castle Donington, and there's nothing quite like the buzz of seeing one of your bands go on stage in front of 90,000 people.
Yeah,
that was great. That was a real happy memory. And then we kind of, by that stage, we'd moved on. Sharon was running it, and sadly, I think the second album probably cost £1 million and sold 100,000, whereas the first album cost 100,000, sold 1 million. So it was kind of, they'd gone full cycle basically. But it was great to work with her, and she was a force of nature, really, I suppose, wasn't she?
She was, yes.
Yeah, and as you said, she had a fantastic Christmas party where we were invited to her house for a Christmas party, and Bon Jovi and the Choirboys were sort of jamming on stage, and Elton John's manager was there, and it was all sort of, high life.
Absolutely.
Wide-eyed us.
And meanwhile, you signed a band called Capercaillie, right?
Well, that's right. Well, we came to the end of the year. The Quireboys was the highlight of our EMI deal, and we came to the end of that in '89, and so we knew we had to get a new record deal. And again, running a huge overdraft in the usual kind of sort of vein of running a record business. So we luckily ended up doing a deal with BMG Records, John Preston at BMG, who was the chairman of BMG. And by that stage, I'd seen sort of on daytime, Sunday lunchtime TV. So I used to be a fan of a TV program called Lost in Space when I was a child, and they were showing it on Sunday afternoons at 1:30, and I remember watching it, and just after that, there was a program called Ali Bain and Friends, Scottish fiddle player, who's sort of, don't know what it was doing, this is back in '89, I don't know what it was doing on sort of LWT in the afternoon, but, and this band came on, and I thought, that's it, I want to sign them, they're great, and they were like a
They
kind
were
of...
very different from the Quireboys.
very different, yeah.
Chalk and cheese.
That was part of the reason,
Yes,
really.
that
I was
was
looking,
it.
and therefore me, folk rock. So I was looking for a band basically like Fairport Convention. That was my.
So you were clear what you...
Yes,
Yes.
I knew what I was looking
Because
for.
everybody else at this stage
Was then signing rock bands.
was signing bands like the Quireboys.
The Little Angels and Thunder and
what
all
we
these
couldn't
bands
sign
were
was
coming
another
through.
band that sounded like the Quireboys. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we kind of, yes, always make it where people aren't looking. And of course, then they were even more unusual in that they were from the Highlands of Scotland, and at least half their material was in Gaelic, which at that stage, early 90s, people would think, you're not even singing in English. Why do you want to sign this band? But they had, fantastic musicians, and again, they were making a living from playing live. They already had a really strong fan following and
around the world as
extraordinary
well, wasn't
musicians.
it?
I remember the first time we saw them, they were playing, I think, at the Purcell Rooms on the South Bank, and it was like a classical concert. They were all sitting down, playing fiddle, whistle, pipes, bouzouki, and kind of accordion, and it was.
And they
really...
had this following without a record deal, did they?
Well, they had a deal through an American
Yes.
indie called Green Linnet that was like a
but
kind
yes,
of catch-all.
no home-based, or
They
no.
had nothing in the UK.
And Green
no.
Linnet would just say, make another album. So there was no kind of.
No marketing or support for them.
Why don't you think of this? Have you thought of that? Because that's really David's forte. He can listen to music and think, where could it go? Where could it go? How could we do this? And Donald Shaw, the workaholic in Capercaillie, actually was great at listening and thinking, yes, actually, David, we could try that. We could do this. And so... between you and he, they came up with some great ideas as to how to stretch the concept without losing the fan base, whilst appealing to a whole new audience.
And it worked, actually. Really, the kind of two things I said to them was get a drummer, which was kind of anathema to them, but they decided, okay, we'll get a drummer, and write your own songs. And interestingly, it turned out that there were 3 songwriters in the band who'd never written a song before, but then started to write their own material. And then their own songs came through, and we made their first album, released it in 1990, and sold 100,000 copies, sort of straight off the bat.
That was through Survival via BMG?
Via BMG, yes. Via BMG
That's
distribution.
pretty impressive, isn't
It
it?
is, isn't it?
But those were great days, really, because I remember, Simon Bates would play a Gaelic song on daytime Radio 1 is just like things that you couldn't conceive of nowadays, you know, that wasn't formatted and sort of playlisted and kind of worked out by computer. People
But they
would just
he played it because he loved it.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Capercaillie music was, once somebody heard it, the music is so hauntingly beautiful, even if it's only at the end of a hard day with your gin and tonic, a piece of music that make you go, okay, right, the world's a better place. And that was part of the appeal, together with their consummate musicianship. Just phenomenal musicians.
Yeah, they were great. And so we basically made 3 more albums with them through BMG. And had great success. In a funny kind of way, BMG sort of thought, yeah, well, we know we could sell 100,000 records, so we'll just take that. And it's always a struggle to get people to sort of see a future for a band. If they're selling records now, they want to cash it now, make the money now, and then spend it on another kind of pop act or something like that. That was always seemed to be the majors' mentality. So by '94, we kind of parted way with BMG then, but luckily we said, well, is it okay if we look after the catalogue? And they said, yeah, okay, we'll pay us an overrider and we'll give you the catalogue. But you sure you want to do that? Because it's not really going to sell. I said, we do probably, And really, funnily enough, that since 94, and of course at the same time, what had also happened was that they'd been approached to do the music for the Hollywood movie Rob Roy, starring Liam Neeson and Jessica Lange, which was being filmed in Scotland by Michael Caton-Jones. And so basically, this was about the same time as Riverdance. So suddenly we were in the right place at the right time. There was a huge and world music, Celtic music, everything kind of came together with
in '95
with that kind of.
We had the catalogue.
And we had the catalogue.
They had the catalogue to back it all up.
Yeah.
And so we released the first album through Pinnacle, and
because we decided at this stage we'd go back to being totally independent,
And
because we now had the base and the solid foundation to be able to say, okay, we can do this, and we'll do it completely our way.
And that's the best place to be if you,
Isn't
if
it
you
just?
can make it
If you
work.
can make it,
you're no longer relying
on
on the mood of your head of A&R as to whether he's going to sign off a 10 grand budget or not, depending on whether he had a good lunch. There's that kind of no longer that mood. I spent so much of my A&R career kind of trying to persuade people to spend money and just trying to sort of cajole people into sort of seeing things my way.
The passion and the vision we had for the music that we signed, at last we could actually manifest out in the world.
Yeah.
And that was
fabulous.
Our most successful period, really, was sort of 95 to 98. And extraordinary where we were. We'd moved out of London, we'd sold the studio, we'd downsized to just Anne-Marie and myself, working out of a bedroom in Anne-Marie's house. So we'd work out of this bedroom, certainly probably not much bigger than the square here. Yeah. And we were turning over like sort of, a lot of money in those days. And we'd have articulated lorries would arrive with 10,000 records on them, and we'd load them into garages. And we had to start hiring our neighbours' garages to store all these records.
Because they'd only be there for 48 hours.
Because
they'd come in and pack them up and they'd be off again.
Yeah, and it was great. And so the kind of whole Hollywood thing. So we actually have been to a Hollywood premiere, which was really a kind of a great buzz. In Edinburgh, they had the Rob Roy premiere in Edinburgh, Princess Gardens.
And I remember, so my Quireboys moment for you, Donington, was Karen. They were at the premiere before they showed the film. Karen, in this fantastic dress, walked up in front of this huge screen and sang, just her,
and
live to mic.
The kind of Gaelic lament, that's the sort of high point of the film.
And she was stunning. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. And I said afterwards, you just didn't look nervous at all. And she said, it's why I wore a long dress. You couldn't see my knees.
Legs shaking, that's right.
But it was fantastic. And the party was phenomenal.
It's great.
Phenomenal.
And the great thing about walking down
the
red carpet at a premiere is that you automatically start waving to people, even though they don't know who the hell you are, and you don't know who the hell they are. You've immediately, as you're walking down, you're sort of waving, and people are waving back to you and cheering. It's a very strange experience.
They should know who you are.
Of course.
I mean, you wait right to the end. There's a little Survival Records credit right at the end. So if you sit through the sort of 4-5 minutes of credits, we get a little credit at the end of the film. But it was great, and then we had a top 40 single off that, basically. So that was great. We managed to get the film footage into our promo, and then we released a promo video that had, and then they could use that to promote the film. So it was great fun. But the one thing about working with Hollywood, which you may have had some experience of, I would say that working with a Hollywood film studio is a bit like being mugged in a certain way, in that they approached us and said, great, we'd like to use your band, we love the music, but the deal we'd like to do is that we'd like to own all the recording and publishing rights, absolutely, and we'll pay the band royalty, but we're not going to pay you anything. And if you don't like it, we'll cut you out of the movie and use somebody else, you know? And that was the deal. So we said, yeah, all right, you know, it's like someone saying, listen, I've got a gun and I'm going to shoot you unless you give me your money. And you think, well, all right, I'll give you my money because the alternative is not so good. And it was,
and all
and
the
it still worked.
opportunities
It
that
still
come
worked.
from that.
Yeah. So I'm very glad.
Exposure,
And
you
of
know.
course, if you'd been with a major, you'd probably spent the next 6 months arguing about that. But we just said, all right, have it. We gave them all the rights. And it worked out, didn't it? Which was great.
But in fact, they only wanted limited rights, didn't they, in effect?
Yes.
So we were able to...
We could re-record the track,
Yes.
which is what we did, basically.
And
so-
which everybody wanted.
And so what happens these days with Survival? What are you up to? You still signing the odd thing now and again?
We signed a few things. I mean, we still have the Capercaillie catalogue. Basically, they've got their own record company now. We probably released 6 or 7 albums by them. So the last album we released an anthology double CD,
Right,
Grace and Pride. We released that in 2004. And that's probably still our bestseller because it's like a sort of, you know, it covers 25 years of their career because that was their sort of 25th anniversary of they all started at like 15 at Oban High School and they've just carried on from there really. And so we released that a few years ago and really we released a couple of things, but it's so hard to get new bands to sell nowadays that we do well with compilations. We do well with compilations.
Yeah.
But the news story, of course, started just before Christmas.
That's right.
When I got this email from an attorney in America saying, do you by any chance have the rights to drinking electricity? Email back, yes, why? She came back and she said, I have a party who may be interested in using a track. Okay, fine, give me the details, make a proposal. And we found out, you know, a bit at a time, because I normally will just kind of go, yeah, you come forward to me, I'll just answer what the questions. And it turned out it was this band called Crystal Castles, whom I hadn't heard of.
No, that's right.
And they had used a sample of ours from our album, our Drinking Electricity album, from 1982, a track called Good Times.
And it's pretty much the whole track. I mean, it's a vocal sample of yours.
But it all unfolded over time, didn't it?
The whole song is basically, so we got 50% of the publishing, and I remember them sending me a CD, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, but I'm not sure it'll do much. And then people started to say, Crystal Castles, I've heard of them, and suddenly it became, you know, they got on the front cover of NME, and you know, suddenly they're kind of a
They were
famous
at Glastonbury
band,
and Reading. And
But isn't it interesting that
Isn't
you
it?
did that 25 years,
yeah,
26
that's right,
years
that's
ago?
I know.
And suddenly there's interest now.
Yes.
I know,
Every
and like there never was. We were doing it 25 years ago, which is a
No,
shame.
that's not quite
That's
that.
totally
But
true.
you know, the really weird thing is hearing this track, and there's me. You know, whatever they've done, they've used a sample that's got my voice on
It's
it,
just
which
your
is
voice, really. That's right. Yeah.
obviously me, and it's such a weird feeling, you know, to have gone back to that person of all those years ago.
Yeah.
You know, really.
Yeah,
You
it's-
never know what's going to happen to
No,
a
you
song
don't.
or a record.
That's
do
right.
you?
It
No,
comes
you
full
don't.
circle. Exactly. Now, so I've been spending hours agonising over a remix of our version and their version. So I just sent it. I spoke to their manager a couple of weeks ago, and he's now got copies. So watch this space. We may even get a release.
And he was asking about Richard Bone and
Early bands. Yeah, and he said, I'm a
Yes.
big fan of Drinking Electricity. It's extraordinary. This Crystal Castles manager said, oh, I'm a big fan of your band. You know, it's like great. And so we're planning to release the best Drinking Electricity, hopefully with
and
yourself.
we're going to upload
gonna come out
all the
finally.
catalogue,
All the
Great.
catalogue.
all the
So
early
it's been a
catalogue.
kind of catalyst
Yes, it's brilliant.
to revisit those days.
And it's really, I don't know, it's really invigorating thinking we've got all this catalogue, which actually, having gone back and played it again, it kind of reawakens the original sense of, I remember why I signed this, is fabulous. And it's such fun. And I think fun's probably been one of the things we've wanted all the time.
Yeah, to
in
enjoy
our
what we do
working
very
life.
much. Yeah,
Because it's been hard a lot of
yeah,
times.
yeah, so you have to enjoy it, basically.
Yes, you do.
So Survival Records was a good name in one way, because as you say, it was hard and you survive.
Yes.
But now it's flourishing. It should
Yeah.
be Flourishing Records now.
Absolutely, yes. Yes,
Okay.
well, it was the name of the game, wasn't it?
It was, no, people always said, well, you know, you succeeded in your aim, basically, you survived. And there's not actually, there's not many of the indie labels that were started around the early 80s that are still going, I
Probably
would
on
say.
one hand you could
Yeah,
count them.
Probably.
Yeah,
But
Yeah, but it's
David,
true, yeah.
David always said, when you get to the stage where any sane person would have given up, you'll start finding success. And he was right.
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah, well done both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in, talking to
Thank you.
Choirboys
That's been
TV.
great. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching Choirboys TV, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.